Lina had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edges of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone that far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lina wanted the other city to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful, and it seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today, she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked and was used to store glasses and dishes so Poppy couldn't get to them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a row of long cans. Lina tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she would find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled baby drink and a jar of boiled carrots and opened them, poured the liquid into the cup and the carrots into a little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For a moment, Lina felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off of Poppy's chin. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lina arrived the next morning, she was greeted by messenger Captain Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said Captain Fleary to the other messengers. A cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lina. "I have her jacket right here," said the captain. She handed Lina a red jacket, like the one all the messengers wore. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep, reverberating bong. 8 o'clock, cried Captain Cleary. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations." As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lina. "Your station," she said, "is Garn Square." Lina nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to make sure that you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lina nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4, the captain went on. Deliver a message only to the person who it's meant for and no one else. Lina nodded again. She bounced a little on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleary smiled. "Go," she said, and Lina was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. She glanced at her reflection as she passed the window of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long dark hair flying out behind her and her long legs in her black socks and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came to Garden Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer! It was old Natty Prine calling to her from the bench where she always sat. "This goes to Ravent Parsons, 18 Selverton Square," she said. "Bend down." She bent down so that her ear was close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broken. Don't come for dinner. Repeat." Lina repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Prine. He gave Lina 20 cents and she ran across the city to Selverton Square. There she found Reverend Parsons, who was also sitting on a bench, and she recited the message for him. "Old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't feel like cooking." No reply. Lina ran back to Garden Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lina that there were more believers than ever nowadays. What they believed in she didn't know, but it must make them happy, for they were always smiling. Her next customers turned to be Mrs. Polster, the teacher of the 4th grade class. In Mrs. Polster's class, they were memorizing passages from the book of the City of Ember every week. Mrs. Polster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's names listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. "What do you need to learn, children?" she always said in her resonant, precise voice, "is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference," here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence, "you must always choose right." In every situation, Mrs. Polster knew what the right choice was. Now, here was Mrs. Polster again, looming over Lina and pronouncing her message. "To Antoinette Layford, 39 Hum Street, as follows," she said. "My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about your disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat." It took Lina 3 times to get it right. "Uh-oh, a red dot for me," she said. Mrs. Polster did not seem to find this amusing. Lina had 19 customers the first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. "I can't come on Tuesday. Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Please come and fix my front door." And others had messages that made no sense at all to her, like Mrs. Polster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know, or hidden alleyways and little rooms in the back of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on a couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Felina Tower had a skeleton of a person hanging against her wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. "I study it," she said when she saw Lina staring. "I have to know how people are put together." At the house on Carew Street, Lina delivered a message to a worried-looking man whose living room was completely dark. "I'm saving on my light bulbs," the man said. And when Lina took a message to Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days, the back room was used for a meeting place for people who like to converse about great subjects. "Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time?" she heard someone ask. "Perhaps," answered another person. There was a long silence. "And then again, perhaps not." All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out, and she loved running. Even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her, walking with sort of a sideways lurch. He was an odd-looking person. He had a very long neck and a bump in the middle, and teeth so big they looked as if they were going to escape from his mouth. His black, bushy hair stuck out from his head in untidy tufts. "I have a message for the mayor at the gathering hall," he said. He paused to let the importance of this be understood. "The mayor," he said. "Did you hear that?" "I got it," said Lina. "All right, listen carefully. Tell him delivery at 8 from Looper." Repeat it back. "Delivery at 8 from Looper," Lina repeated. It was an easy message. "All right, no answer required." He handed her 20 cents and she sprinted away. The gathering hall occupied one entire side of Harkin Square, which was the city's central plaza. The square was paved with stone. It had a few benches bolted to the ground here and there, as well as a couple of kiosks for notices. Wide steps led up to the gathering hall, and fat columns framed its door. The mayor's office was in the gathering hall. So were the offices of the clerks, who kept track of which buildings had broken windows, what street lamps needed repair, and the number of people in the city. There was the office of the timekeeper, who was in charge of the town clock, and there were offices for the guards who enforced the laws of Ember, now and then putting pickpockets or people who got in fights into the prison room, a small one-story structure with a sloping roof that jutted out from one side of the building. Lina ran up the steps and through the door of the broad hallway. On the left was a desk, and at the desk sat a guard. Barton Snood, assistant guard, said a badge on his chest. He was a big man, with wide shoulders, brawny arms, and a thick neck. He was a Small, round, it was a, but his head looked as if it didn't belong on his body. It was small and round and topped with fuzz of extremely short hair. His lower jaw jutted out and moved a little from side to side as if he were chewing on something. When he saw Lina, his jaw stopped moving for a moment, and his gaze curled upward in a very small smile. "Good day," he said. "What business brings you here today?" "I have a message for the mayor." Very good, very good." Barton Snood heaved himself up to his feet. "Step this way." He led Lina down the corridor and opened the door marked Reception Room. "Wait here, please," he said. "The mayor is in his basement office on private business, but he will be up shortly." Lina went inside. "I'll notify the mayor. Please have a seat. The mayor will be right with you, or pretty soon." He left, closing the door behind him. A second later, a door opened again and the guard's small fuzzy head reappeared. "What is the message?" he asked. "I have to give it to the mayor in person," said Lina. Of course," said the guard. The door closed again. He didn't seem very sure about things, Lina thought. Maybe he was new at his job. The reception room was shabby, but Lina could tell that it had once been impressive. The walls were dark red with brownish patches where the paint was peeling away. In the right-hand wall was a closed door, an ugly brown carpet lay on the floor, and on it stood a large armchair covered in itchy-looking red material, and several smaller chairs. A small table held a teapot, and some cups of a larger table in the middle of the room displayed a copy of a book of the City of Ember, lying open to as if someone were going to read from it. Portraits of all the mayors of the city since the tough time began hung on the walls, staring solemnly from behind pieces of old window glass. Lina sat in a big armchair and waited. No one came. She got up and wandered around the room. She bent over the book of the City of Ember and read a few sentences. The citizens of Ember may not have luxuries, but the foresight of the builders, who filled the storeroom at the beginning of time, has ensured that they will always have enough, and enough is all that a person of wisdom needs. She flipped a few pages. "The gathering hall clock," she read, "measures the hours of night and day. It must never be allowed to run down. Without it, how would we know when to go to work or to go to school? How would the light director know when to turn the lights on and when to turn them off again? It is the job of the timekeeper to wind the clock every week and to place the date sign in Harkin Square every day. The timekeeper must perform these duties faithfully." Lina knew that not all timekeepers were as faithful as they should be. She heard of one some years ago who often forgot to change the date sign, so it might say Wednesday, week 38, year 227, for several days in a row. There had been even timekeepers who forgot to wind the big clock, so it might stand at noon or big day for hours at a time, causing a very long day or a very long night. The result was that no one really knew anymore exactly what day of the week it was, or exactly how many years it had been since the building of the city. They called this year 241, but it might have been 245, or 239, or 250. As long as the clock's deep boom rang out every hour and the lights went on and off more or less regularly, it didn't seem to matter. Lina left the book and examined the pictures of the mayors. The seventh mayor, Pod Morthart, was her she didn't know how many greats, grandfather. He looked quite dreary, Lina thought. His cheeks were long and hollow and his mouth was turned down at the corners, and there was a lost look in his eyes. The picture she liked best was the fourth mayor, Jane Larkett, who had a serene smile and fuzzy black hair. Still, no one came. She heard no sounds from the hallway. Maybe they'd forgotten her. Lina went over to the closed door to the right-hand wall. She pulled it open and saw stairs going up. Maybe, while she waited, she'd just go where they went. She started upward. At the top of the first flight was a closed door. Carefully, she opened it. She saw another hallway and more closed doors. She shut the door and kept going. Her footsteps sounded loud on the wood, and she was afraid that someone would hear and come and scold her. No doubt, she was not supposed to be here. But no one came, and she climbed on, passing another closed door. The gathering hall was the only building in Ember with 3 stories. She had always wanted to stand on its roof and look out over the city. Maybe from there it would be possible to see beyond the city into the unknown regions. If the bright city of her drawings really did exist, it would be out there somewhere. At the top of the stairs, she came to a door marked roof, and she pushed it open. Chilly air brushed against her skin. She was outside. Ahead of her she felt a gravel surface, and about 10 paces away she could see the high wall of the clock tower. She went to the edge of the roof, and from there she could see the whole of Ember. Directly below her was Harkin Square, where people were moving this way and that, all of them appearing from this top-down view more round than tall. Beyond Harkin Square, the lighted windows of the city made checkered lines, yellow and black, row after row in all directions. She tried to see farther across the unknown regions, but she couldn't. At the edges of the city, the lights were so far away that they made some kind of a haze. She could see nothing beyond the blackness. She heard a shout from the square below. "Look!" It came from a small but piercing voice. "Someone's on the roof!" She saw a few people stop and look up. "Who is it? What is she doing up there?" someone cried. More people gathered until the crowd was standing on the steps of the gathering hall. "They see me," Lina thought, and it made her laugh. She waved at the crowd and did a few steps from the Bugfoot scurry dance, which she had learned from the Cloven Square dance day. And they laughed and shouted some more. Then the door behind her burst open, and a huge guard with a bushy black beard was suddenly running toward her. "Halt!" he shouted. Though she wasn't going anywhere, he grabbed her by the arm. "What are you doing here?" "I was just curious," said Lina in her most innocent voice. "I wanted to see the city from the roof." She read the guard's name badge. It said Redditch Stabmark, Chief Guard. "Curiosity leads to trouble," said Redditch Stabmark. He peered down at the crowd. "You have caused a commotion." He pulled her toward the door and hustled her down 3 flights of stairs. When they came to the waiting room, Barton Snood was standing there looking flustered, his jaw twitching from side to side, and next to him was the mayor. "A child causing trouble, Mayor Cole," said the chief guard. The mayor glared at her. "I recall your face from assignment day. Shame, disgracing yourself in your new job." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," said Lina. "I was looking for you so I could deliver a message." "Shall I put her in the prison room for a day or two?" said the chief guard. The mayor frowned, and he pondered a moment. "What is the message?" he said. He bent down so that Lina could speak into his ear. She noticed that he smelled a little like overcooked turnips. "Delivery at 8, Lina whispered, "from Looper." The mayor smiled a tight little smile. He turned to the guard. "Just child antics," he said. "We will let this go this time. From now on, behave yourself." Yes, Mr. Mayor," said Lina. "And you," said the mayor, turning to his assistant guard, shaking a thick finger at him, "watch visitors much more carefully." Bart Snood blinked and nodded. Lina ran for the door. Outside, the small crowd was still standing by the steps. A few of them cheered as Lina came out. Others frowned at her and muttered words like mischief or silliness and show off. Lina felt embarrassed suddenly. She hadn't meant to show off. She hurried past out to Otterwell Street and started to run. She didn't see Doone, who was among those watching her. He had been on his way home from his first day in the pipeworks. He had come across the cluster of people gazing up at the roof of the gathering hall and laughing. He was tired and chilly. The bottoms of his pant legs were wet, and mud clung to his shoes and smeared his hands. When he raised his eyes and saw a small figure next to the clock tower, he realized right away that it was Lina. He saw her raise her arm and wave and hop about, and for a second he wondered what it would be like to be up there, looking out over the whole city, laughing and waving. When Lina came down, he wanted to speak to her, but he knew he was filthy looking and that she would ask him questions that he didn't want to answer. So he turned away. Walking fast, he headed for home.